This was a last minute meetup game with MrDrBatman at 101 Poker in Houston. It was on Thanksgiving night, so only the degenerates showed up. Thankfully, I celebrated Thanksgiving the week prior, so I was able to make it. On this vlog, I worked on adding a new custom overlay. Let me know what you think of it, and I'll start making some adjustments. Enjoy. We start off the session with the strongest drawing hand in poker. I open up Ace-King offsuit to $20 from early position. I get flatted by a reg in the middle position. It folds around to MrDrBatman, and he 3-bets to $60 from the small blind. I think that this size is way too small being out of position, especially versus an open and a flat. I think I have a pretty clear 4-bet. It gets back to me and I do 4-bet, bumping it up to $175. The reg folds and MrDrBatman makes the call. We go to the flop with the pot at $380. The flop is the ace of spades, queen of diamonds, 9 of hearts. Mr. Batman checks to me. Definitely a stronger flop for our range and our specific hand. I'm going to generally have a lot of the stronger broadways in my range, as well as hands like aces and queens that MrDrBatman should never really have. I think on this board, I'm generally just going to be using a range bet of around 25%. So I continue for $100. He quickly makes the call. We go to the turn with the pot at $580. The turn is the 6 of diamonds. He checks to us and I decide to check back here. I think that my hand is going to be a mix. I think having the king of diamonds specifically is going to slightly prevent some of his continuing range. I also think that my hand is unlikely to get 3 streets of value always versus middling pairs and a lot of his ace-x combos. I think a lot of his ace-x combos are going to be quite a bit weaker than ace-king, and I don't expect them to call a triple barrel here. This is also a situation where he has probably a few more of the 2-pair combos. I think he's going to have some ace-6 and ace-9 suited, and I think both of us are probably going to have ace-queen, but I don't always want to be bloating the pot with ace-king here, so I think it's fine to pot control at some frequency. The river is the 10 of spades. Not my favorite river in the deck. I think that MrDrBatman makes some 2 pairs here. He makes a few straights here. But I think that when we've checked the turn and the pot is a little bit smaller, we have a clear value bet. I think that generally when I'm checking on the turn, I'm going to condense my range quite a bit. And I think that now most of his ace-x is going to be calling at a very high frequency. And I think I can get called by hands like king-queen, queen-jack when taking this line. I don't want to use a massive size because I do think that at a certain point, I'm not going to get called by some of his weaker ace-x combos or very much of his queen-x combos, and I start getting into a territory where I'm only getting looked up by 2-pair at a high frequency. I decide that a bet size of around 33% seemed appropriate at the time. I made this bet and he quickly calls. I show the ace-king and he says I'm good, and we scoop a 1K pot very early in the session. We have the first of many of MrDrBatman straddles on this hand. He straddles to $10. It folds around to me on the button, and I open queen of hearts, 8 of hearts to $40. The small blind and the big blind fold, and MrDrBatman continues with a call. We go to the flop with the pot at $90. The flop is the 10 of spades, 9 of hearts, 7 of diamonds. I think that this board is generally going to be better for the out of position players range. They're going to have a much higher concentration of suited and offsuited connectors, so they're going to have more straights here and 2-pair combos. But I think that when I open on the button with such a wide range, that this advantage is quite a bit diminished than if I had opened it from a earlier position. Surprisingly, MrDrBatman donks out for $40. I think that my hand is a pure continue here. I'll often continue here as a call, being in position, but I do think that a raise is going to be a relatively high frequency play with the open ender, backdoor flush draw, and the overcard. Generally going to be raising my straight draws that do have a backdoor flush draw at quite a bit higher frequency than I would otherwise. In this instance, I do decide to continue with a call. The pot is $170 and we go to the turn, which is the King of Diamonds. I think that generally this is going to be a card that is better for my range. MrDrBatman continues and he bets $75 into 170. And I think that, again, I can either call or raise. Although I would have liked to pick up a flush draw with my hand, I think that raise is a very strong option here. I don't generally want to be calling in this situation because my hand is pretty frail. I have lost a lot of equity when there's only one card to come, and I have little to no showdown value. I think a raise makes a lot of sense. I'm blocking MrDrBatman's nut hands of 8-6, Jack-8, and Queen-Jack. So that is what I decide to do here. I bump it up to $300. Generally going to be using a 4x size in a single raised pot. He thinks for a little bit and he folds and says nice hand, and we scoop the second pot of the night. I'm running hot as I immediately pick up pocket aces next hand in the cutoff. I open to $20. A reg calls in the small blind and MrDrBatman calls in the big blind. We go to a flop with the pot at $60. The flop is the Queen of Spades, Jack of Diamonds, 3 of Clubs. Generally, this is going to be a board that heavily favors me as the pre-flop raiser. The small blind checks, and surprisingly, MrDrBatman once again donk bets out for $25. Similar to the last hand, I think I have the option to either call or raise. I think that generally I want to raise here more often with another player in the pot, as I want to push out some equity and play heads up. We also know that MrDrBatman is not doing this with a nutted range. I think he's often doing this with hands like top pair and middle pair, and I think raising aces here is going to get a lot of continues from him. I bump it up to $75. Even though I do generally prefer to play pots heads up, I don't mind the reg in the small blind continuing. I still have a very strong hand and I'm in position. Although I typically would use a 4x sizing here, I went a little bit smaller with the pot being multi-way. The reg does fold and MrDrBatman calls. The pot is $210 and we go to the turn, which is the 8 of Hearts. I don't think that generally this turn is going to change too much. I think that MrDrBatman definitely has some 10-9 combos, but the vast majority of his donking range is likely to be top pair and middle pair, and many of these combos which also pick up a straight draw when he has a 10 or a 9 in his hand. I think I have a pretty clear value bet, and generally I think I want to be using a large sizing here in position. He checks and I continue here for around 75% and bet $150. And he does continue. The pot is $510 and we go to the river, which is the 4 of Hearts. One of the biggest blanks in the deck. Definitely shouldn't improve any of MrDrBatman's range. He checks and I decide to go large again and bet $350. Just trying to maximize the value I get versus his top pair combos. At this point, some of his weaker top pair and most of his middle pair I expect to fold. Unfortunately, he does fold here, but we scoop another nice pot early on in the session. We have another straddle by MrDrBatman, this time to $20. I look down at 9 of Hearts, 8 of Hearts in the cutoff, and I open to $70. It folds to the big blind, who calls. This player is brand new to the table. This is his first hand. He came exclusively to play with MrDrBatman, and he was pretty enthusiastic to have the opportunity to sit next to him. MrDrBatman also makes the call in the straddle, and we go to the flop with the pot at $215. The flop is the Ace of Clubs, Jack of Spades, 4 of Hearts. Generally, I'm going to be betting this board at a higher frequency with my range advantage, but when we are here multi-way, I'm definitely going to be betting it less often. I think that my bluffs should primarily consist of straight draws here, but I need to widen my range slightly to have enough bluffs. And typically I'm going to choose hands that have a backdoor straight, backdoor flush. I think that my hand is a reasonable continue here, as I only have 9 high and I do have those backdoor draws. Generally, I'm not going to be using a large size here either when we are multi-way, so I think that betting here with a hand like 9-8 for a small sizing still has a decent amount of fold equity, and I intend to barrel on turn cards when I pick up equity. So it does check to me and I bet $70. The bat fan continues. I expect his range to be made up of most pairs here and all straight draws. I don't think that he's continuing a pure double backdoor style of hand for the most part. MrDrBatman folds, and we go to the turn with the pot at $355. The turn is the 10 of diamonds, and I think that this is going to be a turn card that I will be barreling at a high frequency, as I did pick up some equity with my hand, and I think that overall I still have a pretty strong range advantage here with the triple Broadway board. The bat fan checks in the big blind, and I bet around 75% pot with a size of $270. I think that my opponent will still defend a decent amount of their ace-x here, and I also expect them to continue their double Broadway hands, as these picked up a straight draw. Hands like King Jack, Queen Jack. So I think that if I do get a call here from the big blind, that I do want to barrel at a decent frequency on the river when it is a card that is strong for my range. The big blind does continue for $270, and we have a pot of $895, and my opponent has just over half pot left in their stack. The river is the 9 of spades. I don't expect my opponent to have too much 9x in their range at all. It's really only ace 9 and possibly some sticky jack 9 that makes 2 pair here. I think that all of their straight draws do not connect with the 9, and I think they are unlikely to have a hand like 10-9 that would have continued on the flop. My opponent checks to me, and I think that I still retain the range advantage, and I still have a pretty strong nut advantage with a lot of sets and 2 pair combos that my opponent doesn't have, in addition to hands like King Queen here. I think that my opponent is relatively capped, as all of their stronger hands would have raised flop or turn at some frequency. I also think that it's pretty hard for me to have a bluff here. There doesn't seem to be too many natural bluffs, as most of my straight blocking hands like King X and Queen X are a pair, and I probably want to be checking them back with some showdown value. So I think a hand like 9-8 makes a pretty strong candidate to continue here as a triple barrel. I do decide to shove for my opponent's remaining $590, and he goes deep into the tank. He tanks for a couple minutes, and ultimately he calls, and he shows Queen Jack, which is pretty surprising. I would think that generally I would get my opponent off of most of their Queen Jack combos here. I think it's a reasonable hand to hero call with. He does block some straights, and he blocks some of my 2 pair and set combos. I think that most of my value range is going to be coming from 2 pair combos like Ace Jack and Ace 10. Overall, I think that my all-in sizing would generally garner a fold here from Queen Jack, but unfortunately it doesn't here, and we lose this 2K pot. At this point, the straddles have gotten progressively larger. MrDrBatman straddles to $50. It folds to me, and I open in the cutoff with the Queen of Diamonds and 10 of Clubs to $150. We get a flat from the bat fan in the big blind, and MrDrBatman also makes the call in the straddle. We go to the flop with a pot of $510. The flop is King 7-5, all diamonds. It checks to me. I'm going to be betting a very low frequency, especially on monotone boards, and generally, like I said, I'm going to be using small sizes. This is especially true on monotone boards where the range advantages are much less defined. My opponents have more single ace of diamond flush draws here, and they have a lot of the weaker suited connectors that are made flushes on this flop that I do not have. I think that the queen of diamonds is a strong enough flush to continue here at some frequency. I decide to continue here for a sizing of 150, so definitely on the much smaller size. I get called by Batfan, and MrDrBatman makes the fold. At this point, I can safely say that Batfan has a very wide range. This is a couple orbits later, and he's played the vast majority of hands, and he definitely likes to gamble. I think that his range here is, for the most part, any straight draw, any diamond, and any pair. So definitely on the wider side. We go to the turn with a pot of $810, and the turn is the 5 of hearts. The 5 of hearts is pretty bad for me here. Although I think a lot of players are folding their 5x combos here, I think that Batfan is continuing with all of them, and I think he has a much larger range of 5x hands here than the majority of players in the big blind. It checks to me, and I decide to check back, trying to pot control to a degree if I hit a queen or a 10, and allowing me to see a free river so I don't get blown off my hand. The river is the queen of spades, and Batfan leads out for $200. At this point, pretty much hating life. I really don't beat any value, but for this size, I definitely do need to call a pretty high frequency, even with Queen X here. I think that a lot of my King X combos are going to be continuing on the turn versus Batfan's wide range. And even though he bets very small here and is weighted towards value, because he has such a wide range that has called flop, I think that he definitely is going to have some bluffs here. And with the queen of diamonds, I think I have a pretty mandatory call for this size. We do make the call, and unfortunately he shows us the king 3 offsuit for top pair, and we lose this one. We have a $20 straddle on the button. So action starts in the blinds, the small blind folds, and Batfan opens it up to $75. MrDrBatman quickly calls behind. It folds to me in the cutoff, and I look down at king of spades, queen of spades. This hand can definitely play as a call, getting a decent price and playing in position, but I think that I am definitely ahead of the ranges that we've seen Batfan and MrDrBatman playing, so I elect to re-raise my hand for value. I bump it up to $350. Batfan makes the call. MrDrBatman elects to shove all in with his remaining $520. At this point, the pot is already massive, and their ranges should be slightly stronger. I think that MrDrBatman definitely could be shoving weaker pocket pairs here, weaker broadways. So I think that King Queen is still ahead of their ranges for the most part, but being in position, I decide to make the call, and Batfan makes the call behind. We go to the flop with the pot at $1,595. The flop is the queen of clubs, jack of clubs, 9 of diamonds. It checks to me, and I continue here for a size of $600. Generally just going to be using small sizes in these 3-bet pots, especially when multi-way. Batfan folds. MrDrBatman asks if I'd like to go once or twice. I say once. The turn comes the 5 of clubs, and he says, "That's me." The river is the 4 of hearts, and he flips over the ace 10 of clubs for the turned nut flush draw. Unfortunately, we lose this $1,600 pot. Another hand and another straddle from MrDrBatman, this time to $30. It folds around to me in middle position, and I open to $90 with pocket sixes. I get called by a newer player to the table in the cutoff, and our friend Batfan in the big blind 3-bets to $400. I think that sixes here can be a call or a fold. I think I lean towards call in this spot for the most part, because against this specific opponent, I think I have very good implied odds if I do hit a set. And I think that if I call here, that the cutoff is likely to call behind, giving me even better pot odds. So I decide to continue as a call. and the cutoff does call as well. We go to the flop with the pot at 1,240. The flop is the ace of spades, king of diamonds, seven of clubs. So we completely whiff this flop, unfortunately, and miss our set, but it does check to me, and I decide to bet 400 here, so about 1/3 pot. I think that generally Batfan is going to be betting a very high frequency of his strong hands on this flop. He has a propensity to put money in the middle, so I think when he checks here, he's very likely to have a pair weaker than a king. I also want to be bluffing here occasionally with my weakest pocket pairs, and I do think that sixes is one of the weaker pocket pairs that I'm going to be opening at a decent frequency from middle position. The reason that I want to be betting this style of hand is for a couple reasons. One, these specific type of hands really benefit from denial. There's a lot of overcards that can come on the turn or river, and even if I have the best hand now, I often won't buy the river. This specific hand also is unblocking a lot of my opponent's folding range. He's very unlikely to have a six in his hand, and he often has pairs above the seven or suited connectors / weaker broadways that will fold to 1 to 2 barrels here. In addition, sixes also acts like a bad draw. I only have 2 outs, but when I do hit those 2 outs, they're pretty disguised, and again, my implied odds are pretty high here. So I do go with the bet of $400. The cutoff folds. Batfan tanks for a while, and ultimately he shoves all in. Pretty unfortunate spot for me. I don't think I really can call here at any frequency. He's very rarely shoving worse, and even if he is shoving worse, it's a hand like Queen Jack, Queen 10, Jack 10, which is going to be a gut shot and overcards and have 10 outs against us. So I do make the fold. He then shows MrDrBatman his King 8 that he decided to shove here. So unfortunately, he kind of got max value against us in this spot. We have the rare unstraddled pot in this hand. I open up ace 5 of diamonds from middle position to $25. Started opening slightly bigger when Batfan and MrDrBatman are in the blinds, as I'm trying to be playing in position against their wider ranges and slightly larger pots. The cutoff makes the call, and it folds to MrDrBatman, who bumps it up to $120. Action is on me, and I think I can do any of the options. I think raise, call, and fold are all reasonable. Generally, I try to use this hand as a high frequency 4-bet. I think that it has the ability to crack a lot of the pocket pairs with the ace high overcard. It has the ability to make flushes, and it has the ability to make straights. So I decide to make it 300. The cutoff folds, and MrDrBatman thinks for a little bit, and he makes the call. We go to the flop with the pot at $630. The flop is the 6 of diamonds, 4 of diamonds, 4 of spades. Very good flop for our hand with the nut flush draw. Generally, I'm going to decide if I want to range bet a lot of these situations in 4-bet pots. I think that a lot of the lower connected board textures are better for the 3-better. But specifically when the board is this low and paired, there's a little bit less that my opponent's range can connect with this board. So I think I will be generally range betting on this board. Going to use pretty small sizes in 4-bet pots, as we can get the chips in regardless. So when MrDrBatman checks to me, I do continue for a size of 175. He makes the call. I think that you will see a large calling range here by most players, but I do think that versus a small size that most players are still under defending, and it still allows me to put in large barrels on the turn and the river. The turn is the Jack of clubs, which is going to be generally favorable for my range. MrDrBatman can't really continue here with a Jack X holding unless it contains the Jack of diamonds or it's 2 very strong overcards with a backdoor flush draw likely, so something like ace jack of spades, king jack of spades, where I think that because I'm range betting, I have a lot more of the ace jack, king jack holdings, including some of the offsuit combos. Because this turn is very favorable for me, I think that I am supposed to be barreling this card at a very high frequency. I think that my specific hand probably prefers to barrel for the most part, but I will still be checking back a low frequency and trying to realize my equity. I think in hindsight, I would have barreled this spot for around probably 60% pot. In this instance, I don't think I was necessarily playing my A game at this point, and I wanted to just realize my equity in position, so I decided to check back. The river is the 6 of hearts, which really shouldn't change much. MrDrBatman leads out for 400. I think that with ace high here, I probably just need to fold the vast majority of the time. I think that my opponent is going to be bluffing missed diamonds at some frequency. So I think that specifically my combo is also blocking some of his bluff combos. So he's slightly weighted towards value. Although I think it's hard for him to have a very strong value hand when he only bets 33% pot here. I think that he could definitely have some pocket pairs above the 6 that are still going for value, and he could possibly have a hand like the Jack of Diamonds. I think it's a pretty trivial fold for the most part, so that is what I do. In the last hand of the session, I open Ace of Hearts, 8 of Clubs from middle position to $25. I get flatted by Batfan in the small blind, and I get flatted by MrDrBatman in the big blind. We go to a flop with the pot at $75. The flop is the Queen of Diamonds, Jack of Clubs, 7 of Hearts. A board texture that is very bad for our hand, and we have very little equity versus 2 players. Generally, I'm going to be peer checking this hand in this situation, as I'm going to have a lower frequency bet multi-way, and you want to have a little bit more equity when c-betting. It checks around and we go to the turn, which is the 10 of spades, giving me a double gut shot. Batfan leads out here for $50. I think that Batfan has a wide range of pairs here, including 7x combos, which I have additional equity against, and I think that he is capable of betting here with bluffs that contain a king, a 9, an 8, and who knows what else. I think that my hand is close. The double gut shot is definitely some added equity. I think my ace is good as well, and I'm in position. But there's also a strong case of folding here, as a 9 on the river will not give me a very strong straight. I think versus this sizing, I want to be generally making the call. So I flick in $50 and we see a river. The river is the 8 of hearts. Batfan bets out $100. At this point, I think we have a very frail hand with a 4-liner to the straight. I think there's no world where I can really call and have showdown value. So my options are raise or fold. Generally, I should be folding this combo, but I thought that with my opponent's wide range and him only betting 100 here, I could push him off of a lot of his stronger hands as long as he didn't have a 9x combo. I think it would be feasible for me to have a lot of 9x combos here, as I would check hands like ace 9, queen 9, jack 9 at a very high frequency, and some number of king 9, 10 9, and 9 8 on the flop. And then getting to the turn, I think that the only hand I would raise at a very high frequency is probably going to be 9 8, but I would still continue with the other 9x combos. I think that when Batfan is betting only $100 into this $175 pot, that he's often going to have a hand that is weaker than a 9x. I think he has a very wide range that he would be betting here on the river. So I decide to raise it up to $300. Clearly not learning my lesson from all the previous hands against Batfan that he loves to call. He does tank for a few minutes, but ultimately does flick in 200. And he shows the queen 10 for turned 2 pair. Unfortunately, the session didn't go very well. I lost just over 3K. I started off strong, but wasn't able to make too many value hands after the first half hour to an hour, and a couple ill-timed bluffs, along with a couple $100 straddles later in the session where I completely whiffed on board textures, quickly diminished my stack. Hopefully this losing session was just an anomaly. Thought that the game was very good and had a lot of potential to make a profit. It just didn't happen this time. I appreciate you guys tuning in, and I will see you guys next time.